It is literally my favorite place in the world. It's on a small, very secluded lake, shared by only a few other cabins, one other cabin by my side, 6 in total. Most of my neighbors only visit during spring-fall months, and even then it's pretty rare to run into one of them. We all pretty much leave each other to do our own thing, but we also try to look out for each other the best we can. We will occasionally check in on each other's property during off-season visits, just to be sure there haven't been any damages from storms or any break-ins, etc. We all try to be good neighbors, because the lake is a pretty popular fishing location in the area as a result of it being so secluded. It's not unusual to see people who don't live on the lake out in a boat or hiking around with a fishing pole. In the winter, it becomes a popular place for ice fishing and snowmobiling. So again, it kind of reinforces why all of us who own property on the lake try to look out for one another, as there are people coming and going at all times of the year. There have been a few break-ins on the lake over the years, but honestly, in the 30+ years I've been going up to the cabin, there have only been a handful. Occasionally, someone's canoe or kayak will go missing, but that's pretty much the worst of it. Until this winter. My wife and I decided to take a week-long vacation at the cabin this winter. She was getting ready to start a new job, and I had leftover PTO from the previous year. So, we figured we should take the opportunity to get away before our schedule started to get busy again in the spring. It was sort of impromptu, but once we got the idea of spending a week alone together, relaxing by a wood stove, drinking craft beer, winter hiking, and binge-watching DVDs, we couldn't get it out of our heads. 2 weeks later, we were packed up in my father's F-150. We swapped cars, and on the road. Things got wacky immediately. But first, there are a couple of things you need to know about this location. The lake basically sits in the middle of a dead zone as far as wireless reception goes. Sometimes, you can randomly get a couple bars of service, but never with regularity. The isolation and feeling of being unplugged is one of the main reasons I love going up to the cabin. It becomes a lot easier to not glue yourself to your phone when you physically can't. Secondly, as mentioned before, the place is secluded. It's a solid 10-minute drive before cell reception kicks in with any sort of consistency, and about another 5 before you reach town. A couple of years ago, and after much debate within the family, we decided to break down and get a satellite dish installed, so we could have some connection with the outside world. We essentially have basic cable for news, weather, and a phone line. However, my folks have the service suspended at the start of winter, since our family rarely visits during those months. So my wife and I were heading up without a phone connection. But it had never been a problem before, so we didn't really think anything of it. It hadn't snowed too much in our area, but the ground was still covered in a few inches of old snow, and there were snowmobile tracks all over the place. Before reaching the final turn off towards the cabin, you have to drive across a causeway, fancy term for a land bridge, and while crossing it, you get a really good view of both sides of the lake. It had been cold for a few weeks straight, so the lake was frozen over. I looked out over the lake and saw what appeared to be 2 guys ice fishing, sitting on a picnic table out in the middle of our side of the lake. It was my neighbor's picnic table. I knew right away that it was his because of its very distinct paint job. This exact thing had actually happened before, and the last group of fishermen that did this left his table out on the ice, and it fell through once the lake started to thaw. Because of this, my neighbor had chained his new picnic table to a concrete footing on the edge of his property. So that means these guys either broke the table to get it out on the lake, or they broke the chain. I'm also pretty confident that it wasn't my neighbor out on the ice because he lives in Florida, doesn't fish, and never visits in the winter. This pissed me off. I say something along the lines of, "Again? What the fuck is their problem?" to my wife, and she reciprocated in a similar fashion. Since both of us were in agreement, I sped up to get to the cabin and confront them before they could run off. I didn't really have a plan, but I figured I would go yell at them and threaten to call the cops if they didn't put it back, which I couldn't actually do. I kind of figured that as soon as they saw the truck turn down the road, they would take off anyway. I was right, but oddly more right than I knew. As I came down the road, I noticed a few things that struck me as odd. First, there were two dudes jumping onto and starting up snowmobiles that were parked in front of my neighbor's cabin. Second, the front door to the cabin was wide open, lights were on, and there was smoke coming out of the chimney. I stopped the truck about 50 feet from his driveway and watched as the two guys drove the snowmobiles out onto the lake, picked up their buddies and sped off across the lake and into the woods. We kind of just sat there for a minute or two, dumbfounded. I wasn't really sure what was going on, but it definitely didn't feel right. I guess it was technically possible that my neighbor was visiting, or that maybe he rented his cabin out to some people. But my gut told me that wasn't the case. There were no cars on his driveway, and the guys on the snowmobiles were definitely in some sort of hurry when we pulled up. Also, it was like 10 degrees outside, so why would they leave the door open? After snapping out of it, I parked the truck in front of our cabin and walked over to the edge of the lake. Sound travels pretty well out there, and I could hear the snowmobiles getting farther and farther away. I unlocked our cabin, threw a quick start log into the wood stove, and then my wife and I headed over to my neighbor's cabin with our dog. I called out, "Hello?" a few times, and then I tried, "The Scrumster's neighbor, are you there?" and got nothing back. As we got closer, I could see that the front door was splintered and had been pried open. My wife and I had unknowingly pulled up while people were actively breaking into my neighbor's cabin. Not exactly an ideal way to start a relaxing winter getaway. My family is on really good terms with my neighbors, so I went ahead and stepped inside to check it out. There was a fresh pile of wood by the stove, which was roaring, and the kitchen had some paper plates, food, empty beer cans, and cigarette butts strewn about. Nothing seemed broken or missing that I could tell, but the place was an absolute mess and reeked of cigarettes. It was as if they had just decided to help themselves and make my neighbor's cabin their own private fishing lodge for a while. There were some sleeping bags and a cooler in the living room, so it looked like they had been planning to stay for more than a day. I wasn't in the cabin for more than a minute or so, and I was careful not to touch anything. I did, however, snap a few pictures for my neighbor, the cops. And then I snuffed out the wood stove. I also decided to close the front door the best I could when I left, while wearing gloves, since we were going to have to leave in order to get in touch with the police and my neighbor. And I didn't want the front door left wide open. The next couple of hours were pretty bunk. We drove into town and reported the break-in to the police. After giving our report, we got in touch with my neighbor, who was, understandably, very upset. I did my best to assure him that things weren't too bad, all things considered, and that there would just be some cleaning up to do. I offered to do it since we were going to be up there all week, but he insisted that he wanted to see it all for himself. He was going to make plans to fly up from Florida to deal with everything as soon as he could, but asked if I could nail a couple boards across the broken door for now. The police were heading out to check out the property. Blah, blah, yuck. When we got back to our cabin, the police were already at my neighbors checking things out. One of them came over and asked if I could walk them through everything that happened. I retold the story and ended it with something along the lines of, "So I left, after shutting down the stove and closed the door behind me." I got some weird looks, and then conversation went something like this. "You're sure you closed the door because it was open when we got here?" "Yes, I definitely closed the door." "Well, it was open. And the items you described aren't there either. The sleeping bags, the cooler. They aren't there. So it looks like they came back and got them." That was pretty unnerving for some reason. Why risk coming all the way back for more sleeping bags and a cooler after getting away? They couldn't have known for certain that we weren't able to call the police right away. So the cops suspected that they were watching us and came back right after we left. Or that there was someone else in the area we didn't see. I listened to the snowmobiles driving off, and they got pretty far away. They kept going until I couldn't hear them anymore, and the woods on the other side of the lake is completely untouched wilderness for miles. I know because I hunt turkey out there, so I personally think there was someone else close by watching us. My wife really liked that little bit of information, especially since only a few years ago, we had been basically followed by creepers on a previous trip to our cabin. The whole situation was just a giant fucking downer. After a while, the cops finished up and let us know they would keep a cruiser in the area. Not that they would really help. And that they were going to check the other cabins for any signs of break-ins. I nailed my neighbor's door shut, dragged the picnic table off the ice. They had cut the chain. And headed back inside for a much-needed beer, or 3, or 4. We had debated a little bit about canceling the trip and heading back home for a staycation. But honestly, we were determined to enjoy our week because we had really been looking forward to it. So we decided to stay. The next couple of days were great. We did exactly what we planned on doing, which was mostly nothing. We watched movies, snuggled, and drank in excess. I made my world-famous chili, and my wife ate it. We had bacon, eggs, and mimosas for breakfast, beer, grilled cheese, and mediocre red box movies for lunch. And vodka tonics, hearty winter meals, and sexy times for dinner. It was awesome. Granted, every time we heard a snowmobile, we both gave each other an "Oh shit, look," but after a few times we were joking about it, and our "oh shit" looks morphed into a game of who can make the funniest face. We were just generally having a great time. As much as we were enjoying being completely overindulgent bed bunnies, by midweek we wanted to stretch our legs, so we decided to go out for a hike. It was a beautiful day, and I knew the surrounding area very well, so I suggested we hike up the dam at the mouth of the river. Stream, really. It feeds the lake. It freezes over in winter and looks pretty cool. It was a 2 to 3 hour hike round trip, depending on the pace, short and sweet. We brought our dog along, and again, we're having a great time, enjoying the extremely scenic winter woods and each other's company. On our way back, things took an unfortunate turn. About 2-ish miles, 30 minutes from the cabin, we hear the whine of snowmobiles. We each made a funny face, joked, and then got quiet and kept listening. They were getting closer. At the time, it wasn't exactly unexpected. It was a gorgeous day out, and we were smack dab in the middle of prime snowmobile territory. But given everything that had happened earlier in the week, it was impossible to not feel a little uneasy. The snowmobiles kept getting closer, and the whine was getting louder and louder. My wife and I talked about something, but honestly, I wasn't really listening to her. I was going over the situation in my head, and I don't quite remember what we were talking about. The engine sounds were getting louder, and it was obvious they were coming down the same trail we were on. I suppose it could have been anyone. Perhaps a father and son enjoying the day, or a couple of friends off to meet up with some of their buddies. Regardless, I just got a very bad feeling. I carry, almost as a direct result of the last weird encounter I had at the cabin. So I made the decision to unholster, rack around into the chamber, and reholster. Just in case. Not here to debate the pros, cons of guns or carrying +1. But I do what I do, and I did what I did. And I feel good about it. The trail we were on was about 5 to 6 feet wide, well traveled. So once the snowmobiles came into view, I picked up our dog. He's a little guy, but he thinks planet Earth is his, and the rest of us are just weird old visitors here to grace him with treats. And then we stood off to the edge of the trail so they could pass us. I think we played it pretty standard, as far as general common courtesy goes. As soon as they saw us, they both stopped in the middle of the trail, about 100 feet from where we were standing. I waved. They didn't wave back. I could see that they were talking back and forth, occasionally looking at us. They seemed to finish up their conversation, and then gunned their engines. Both of them started approaching us very fast, and appeared to be on a line to hit us. My wife and I stepped back a few steps into the brush as they fucking buzz us. At full throttle. I'm talking inches, not feet. They continue past us for a bit, and then stop, and turn to look back at us. I instinctively, almost as a reflex, threw up my free arm, holding a furiously barking Boston Terrier in the other, and yelled, "What the fuck is your problem?" One of them replied with a middle finger, revved the engine a few times, and then they both took off down the trail. My wife was a wreck afterwards. I was scared, but she was really scared. The trail we were on basically ends where our property begins. So if it was the same people from earlier in the week, they would know we weren't home. We had another 30 minutes of hiking before we got back, and the whole time we could hear the snowmobiles ahead of us. They didn't disappear and get farther away like before. The whole walk back, they were completely within earshot. After about 10 minutes, we could hear that they had stopped, and then started driving around at low RPM. The engines were running, but not at full throttle. After a few minutes, we stopped and waited. They started at full blast again, this time getting farther and farther away. We waited until we couldn't hear them again, and then headed for the cabin. When we got back, there were snowmobile tracks all around the property, out front and back. They had been circling the cabin. We had no way to call the police, so after an extremely short and extremely tense conversation, we promptly packed up, closed up the cabin, and left for home. Vacation officially ruined. We contacted the police, but there wasn't much to say other than a couple of assholes on snowmobiles almost ran us over. Then they drove all over our property. We may have been more selective with our words. The police were certainly sympathetic and, again, given the break-in at my neighbor's, they seemed pretty concerned about it. In the end, there wasn't much for them to do. We gave descriptions, our info, and left. The thing that gets me the most is that even though my wife acts like it didn't bother her too much, I know it did. I have been going to that cabin my entire life, and some of the best memories I have are up there, on that lake. Now, I not only have one, but two terrible and frightening experiences at that cabin, where the person I love the most in this world was potentially at risk. I'd never ask her to go somewhere she doesn't feel safe. And honestly, I'm not sure I feel safe going up there anymore. The good news is that both my neighbor and my family decided to have proper alarm systems installed. So at the very least, someone will be alerted to any future break-in attempts. However, it still doesn't help with the fact that when you are far away from help, you are essentially at the mercy of others. I know and believe that the vast majority of people are good-natured, but I'm learning that all it takes is one person, or multiple in my case, to really ruin a day. No updates regarding the break-in as of yet. Thanks for listening. Stay safe out there. This is actually still an ongoing thing in my life. In all honesty, there's a lot of crap that's been going on in my life. I don't know why, but I guess I just sort of attract creeps. To give a little background to this particular occasion, I started dating a guy when I was 20. He was about 8 years older than me. Well, yes, I do feel stupid in hindsight. I met this guy when I was at a friend's birthday party. She hadn't told me who else she'd be inviting, and I only knew like 4 out of 16 people, including her. The 4 people I knew were Elaine, the birthday girl, Christian, Martin, and Jacob. The guy who eventually became my boyfriend. Let's refer to him as, say, Jeff. Was someone Elaine had gotten to know via a D&D group she was in. Jeff was extremely forward, The entire party, he'd stick close to me and try to talk to me. When we were all sitting down to eat, he sat right across from me, staring and smiling. I was a bit uncomfortable with the attention he was giving me, but I brushed it off as me just not being comfortable with being stared at. Christian asked me at one point if I wanted him to ask Jeff to stop. I just said no, because he hadn't really done anything. When the party ended, Jeff offered to walk me home. I said that it wasn't needed, as I lived only about 5 minutes away and it wasn't particularly late. Still, he insisted, and I didn't know how to tell him to buzz off. As we walked, he started telling me that he found me very attractive and wanted to date me. I was a bit confused. I mean, we didn't even know each other. But Jeff acted like he'd known me his entire life. And when I called him on that, he simply told me that Elaine had told him a lot about me, on account of her and me being very close friends. I tried to convey the point that I wasn't really interested in anything romantic, partly because I didn't know him at all. He told me that was fine, and that it could be purely physical if I wanted it to be. No, that I hadn't had sex for 2 years at that point, and my libido was going haywire. Jeff wasn't particularly ugly either, so my starved libido took control and stated that, yeah, that would be fine. So yeah, boyfriend, girlfriend. I honestly wouldn't have said anything to him if I had known what was going to happen. We'd had a thing going on for maybe 2 weeks before he started to call me literally several times a day. I got very frustrated, as I am fond of having my alone time, and didn't always answer. If I didn't, Jeff would be worried and ask Elaine to contact me to see if I was fine. Whenever I did go to see Jeff just to have sex, he'd start asking me stuff along the lines of, would you like to have kids? And wouldn't you want to move out of your dad's place? And so on. I'd give vague answers at best, and never directly relate them to anything regarding relationships. Apparently, Jeff interpreted them as being such anyway. We'd been together for maybe 2 months when I started to ignore his calls and texts entirely. He was smothering me, demanding to see me every day and demanding that I always be available for him to talk to. I tried to tell him multiple times that what we had was nothing binding, only a physical relationship, only for the sex. I was not in love with him, and I was not out for a romantic relationship with anyone. He didn't get the point. It took maybe a week of me ignoring him for Elaine to call me out of the blue and starting to accuse me of making her friend miserable. I told her I didn't know what the fuck she was talking about. I'm talking about Jeff, she told me. He says you haven't answered him for over a week now. What the fuck is wrong with you? I told her what he'd been doing, and that I just wasn't comfortable with it. I also explained that I told him to knock it off, which she didn't believe. Oh, you better fucking call him right now, she told me. He needs to hear your voice. He just wants to know if you're okay. Some fucking best friend, right? I didn't call Jeff until the next day, and only after having made the decision that I had to break things off. We decided that we'd meet in the park in the middle of town. This didn't sit too well with him because he wanted me to come to his place. But I wanted a more public place, just so that he wouldn't make a scene or try anything stupid. When we did meet, he did his usual smiley stuff. He acted like nothing was wrong. He even brought flowers and chocolate for me, which I told him immediately that I wasn't going to accept. He just asked me what I wanted to talk about, and I told him I wanted to break things off. The more I told him about how clingy he was getting with a person who wasn't romantically interested in him, the more his smile faded. He looked utterly crushed, like I'd taken everything he loved and just set it on fire. "But you can't do that," he told me. "We were going to move in together. You wanted to have kids with me. I've been looking at rings and everything. You can't do this to me." Rings. It boggles the fucking mind how he hadn't understood anything I'd said about not being interested in him romantically. I still don't know how the fuck that happened. I persisted and told him that was his problem, not mine. I'd made things clear from the start, and I'd never shown any signs of a romantic interest. He became very upset. He started crying. And he said that he had nothing left to live for if I left him. He told me that as soon as I left him in the park, he'd just go home and hang himself. The problem with this statement is that I had two friends at the time who have been through similar breakups, and they had been reeled back in by this because they were actually romantically attached. I was not, and I knew that what he was trying to pull was a bullshit manipulative tactic. I called him on it. "You'll be fine," I told him. "No, you're not going to fucking kill yourself. Just go home, Jeff, and think things through. All the same, we're done." I thought that would be the end of things. I was certain that I wasn't going to be bothered by him again. I got calls from Elaine for about 2 weeks afterwards, and continuous questions from friends who wanted to know why I broke up with such a nice guy. Elaine, in particular, was very stubborn, and didn't believe me when I said that he threatened to kill himself if I left him. Fast forward about 2 years. I just started dating a girl from a school I went to, and I was feeling pretty content. I knew from Facebook posts and frequent updates from Elaine that Jeff was now engaged to a girl we can call Celia, and that he seemed to be feeling alright. I didn't think much about it, so when Elaine's birthday party came around, and we were both invited, I didn't feel like it would be awkward. During the party, Jeff spent a lot of time eyeing me and smiling at me. I tried not to make eye contact with him, and spent most of my time talking to my friends. Then Celia pulled me to the side and started asking me if Jeff had ever acted weird when I was with him. I explained to her that we never had a romantic relationship, only a sexual one, and that I didn't spend much time with him outside of that. She looked really uncomfortable, and told me that she happened to see his Facebook open on his laptop the other day. He'd been sending messages to a 13-year-old girl from the area. Celia knew the girl's mother. They had been talking about sex, and Jeff had been giving advice to her. Celia could even cite some of the things he suggested that the girl should do during sex. And I could easily identify that these were things that he, in particular, found sexy. Was I angry? No. I was fucking furious. Celia really did seem like a nice girl, and she was in a relationship with a sleazeball who was apparently sending blatantly sexual messages to a 13-year-old. I told her that she could either break up with him or tell the police. She did neither. She called me about 2 weeks later and said that they'd had a heart-to-heart talk about things and he had denied everything. But he had stopped messaging that girl. I wasn't too certain. It was around this time that I started getting very sexual messages in my Facebook feed from his profile. He said that he missed me, that he missed holding me close, missed fucking me. He missed it when it was just us. At first I just ignored it. At least he wasn't talking to a teenager anymore. Then his messages started getting threatening. He said that seeing me had reminded him of how much he'd loved me, and how I had betrayed him. He talked about how I'd crushed his heart and how he wanted to get back at me for it. I got messages along the lines of, "I'll come see you at your school, and I'll fuck you in the dining hall before I take care of you." I should have told the police at this point, but I didn't. I just got angry and finally messaged back. I told him that if he kept messaging me, I'd just screenshot every single message and send it to Celia. I'd send it to Elaine as well. And she'd finally see what a fucking asshole he was, and wouldn't defend him anymore. He did send more messages. He had found my then girlfriend's profile and talked about how heartbroken I would be when she broke up with me. He said he'd tell her what a tease I was, that I was incapable of loving anyone, and that she should get out while she still could. I did message Celia about this, and she listened to every word and talked to Jeff. Maybe it's a credit to her personality to know that she was patient enough and loved him enough to not leave him. Or maybe she just doesn't see how fucked in the head this guy is. Yeah, they're still together. Married by now. I still get messages from Jeff every now and then, but I delete them without reading. The only glimpse I've caught has been about my current fiancé, and how he'd love to fuck my life up the way I fucked him over. The few times I've seen Jeff downtown when I've been out with my fiancé, I've grabbed her hand and pulled her across the street, away from him. I'm not scared of him, but every time I see him, my body goes into fight or flight mode, and it settles on fight, with focus on rage. And all this because he's too fucked in the head to see that someone's not interested in him. Update. I spoke to Celia this morning. She called me rather out of the blue and asked if Jeff had messaged me lately. I had been very antsy about showing her the messages at all, beyond what I told her he had said about my ex. But I said that he messages me every now and then. She got very specific and said, "Has he sent you any sexual or threatening messages?" To which the only answer was, of course, yes. Celia told me that Jeff is out of town right now for work. She has decided to seize the moment and go to the police, and she wanted to see the messages. A bit surprising, really, as they've been married for a while now. I asked her about this, and she told me that she's out of patience. She had hoped that he wouldn't do anything stupid with her around, but she can't keep an eye on him every minute of every day. She's afraid of what will happen. She also told me that he's been talking to her niece, who is 12, over Facebook. Her niece had given him her Tumblr URL, and for the past few weeks, the girl has apparently received very sexual and intimidating messages via Tumblr. Needless to say, Celia is currently very angry. I just sent her the screenshots I've taken of the messages, and she has gone to the police station with every bit of information she has managed to gather. For all that I think she has been far too patient, I can only say bless this woman. About 5 months ago, a friend of mine got expelled from his program because of bad marks. He was only halfway through his lease and he didn't see a point of staying in the city since he was only there for school. He told me that if I wanted to take over his lease as a subletter, he would only charge me half of the rent, which I thought was a pretty sweet deal. So naturally, although I am from this town, I thought it was time to leave my parents' place. I had already graduated and, although I had been looking for a new job for a while, I still felt like I couldn't miss out on the opportunity. So I took over his lease and moved into his place. The house itself is actually pretty nice. It's 3 floors including the basement, and it's located near the university of my town, which is not a very safe area overall, but I spent a lot of my university years here and never felt unsafe. The room in the basement is pretty small but cozy, and the only other room down here is a girl who is currently a student, and she's pretty quiet. Actually, all the girls living here are pretty good roommates. I wasn't thrilled about living with 3 girls, but I don't see why I would have thought it was an issue. They're all pretty great and a good time. I'm the only one in the house who is not a student, and also the only one who is originally from this town. The other roommates are actually all from cities that are only about an hour or 2 away at most, so unless there's something special going on, they all go home on weekends. My friend who got expelled also only lives 2 hours away, so he would always go home for the weekend as well. One thing I forgot to mention, which is pretty crucial to the story, is that the house actually has 5 rooms, but right when they all moved into a new place together, one of the girls had a seizure on her bed and passed away. This was pretty upsetting for everyone, and the landlord told them not to worry about finding anyone else. Their rent never went up or anything, and the room was left vacant. According to the landlord, he just found it insensitive to try and find someone because he didn't want to turn someone's death into a financial inconvenience for him. So after the girl's death, the parents came and took her belongings out of the room, and it just remained empty since then. I actually never looked in there because it just remained locked, and I don't really have much curiosity to see the room. It's on the 2nd floor, and I never go up there, so I never paid any attention to it. The first weekend I spent there was pretty uneventful. I remember that I spent one night at my boyfriend's place, and then the next night he slept over after we went out drinking at one of the college bars near the place. We were pretty wasted, so we passed out as soon as we got home. The next weekend I was home in my new room, and I couldn't sleep, so I decided to read a little bit. I was really enjoying the quietness of this new house since the girls weren't home at all. I come from a Latino family, so this quiet and serene environment was pretty rare. I thought that I heard a few noises upstairs, so I figured that one of the girls had probably decided to stay the weekend at the house. Or she was just getting last-minute things ready before heading home. I really didn't think much of this thing. I wasn't very close with the roommates, so I didn't even bother asking if any of them had stayed home. I just felt like it was none of my business. The girl in the basement was for sure gone for the weekend because she apparently sleeps with her door locked and keeps it open when she's not home. One weekend, that same month, I woke up to pee and I could hear a toilet flushing upstairs, which was kind of weird since I knew that none of the girls were home. I was going to go check it out, but in my tired state I was too lazy and just didn't care enough. It's funny. Horror movies are supposed to make you paranoid, but the biggest lesson I got from them was that there's always a rational explanation for things. This would prove to be my biggest mistake because for a couple months I was always brushing things off and ironically creating irrational explanations to rationalize what I thought were irrational thoughts. For example, I heard creaking coming from the second floor and figured one of the girls must have forgotten something and decided to come by to pick it up. The girl must have driven 2 hours down and 2 hours back to her town in the middle of the night to pick something up. One Saturday, I woke up to get some water, and I noticed that the roommate in the basement was gone. Her door was open, and her car was not in the driveway. There weren't any cars in the driveway, but I should mention that one of the girls doesn't drive. A couple hours later, I woke up because I heard steps coming down into the basement. At this point, I yelled out the girl's name who doesn't drive because she is the only one who could have been in the house. I didn't get a reply and just heard the steps going back upstairs. At this point, I started getting uneasy about being home on weekends, so I decided to just spend them at my boyfriend's house. One of the girls made a house Facebook page, which was supposed to address any issues like washing dishes or leaving messes, but it remained pretty inactive since everyone seemed to get along. I posted on there that some creepy stuff was happening on weekends and asked them if they could start letting me know if they'd be home for the night or not. They seriously thought I was joking around. The replies were not receptive at all and consisted of LMAO or OMG, you're so funny. Even my boyfriend agreed that I was being paranoid because he too believed that everything has a rational and perfect explanation. The thing is, when you say that everything has an explanation, you are only invalidating paranormal explanations or ghostly activity, which is not what I was implying at all. I've never believed in ghosts or spirits or any of that jazz, and I never claimed to when I spoke to my roommates or to my boyfriend. They kept on saying that the house was old and made noises, but I know the difference between old house noises and someone walking down the stairs and back up the stairs. Fortunately, my roommates did start posting things on the Facebook page to let me know they'd be gone. It was always to the effect of, "Hey, getting fired, lol. I won't be home this weekend, so don't worry about the ghosts." One weekend, they all let me know that they would not be home, and my boyfriend was on the midnight shift, so I had to spend the night on my own. My boyfriend called me on his break, and while I was on the phone with him, I heard noises on the main floor. I told him I was going to check it out, and he told me to go ahead cause the motherfucker still thought I was being paranoid. As I said this, I heard the footsteps going back up to the second floor. Once I got onto the main floor, there was nobody in the kitchen, and all the doors into the house were locked. I was extremely paranoid and did not feel safe. My boyfriend calmed me down and convinced me that everything was okay. So I never went to the second floor, and it's probably best that I stayed on the main floor. After that weekend, I told my roommates in all seriousness but I was convinced that someone had been in our house at some point that night. I told them what I heard, and the fucking bitches still claimed that it was the old house making noises. My boyfriend was almost permanently on midnight, so I did what I never wanted to do, and started spending weekends at my parents' place. The girls still posted on the page whether or not they were leaving the house or not, and I decided that I should do the same. So I started posting when I was and was not sleeping at the house. On Friday night, the Facebook page looked something like this: Roommate 1, not sleeping at home. Roommate 2, not sleeping at home. Roommate 3, staying home because of my midterm exams. Me, I'm staying at my parents' place. The next morning, I received a frantic text from one of the roommates saying that the roommate with the midterms had been attacked. Apparently, she was in her room studying and heard a noise right outside of her bedroom. When she went out to inspect it, she was greeted by a man walking out of the dead girl's room. I later found out more details about the whole thing from the roommate who was attacked. The man looked rough, greasy hair, and just a dirty, dirty face. When they made eye contact, he held his finger up to his mouth and uttered a shh while smiling. The nail on his finger was long, and his beard was apparently really scraggly and uneven, like it only grew on certain parts of his face. She screamed out of instinct, even though she knew there was nobody in the house. He lunged at her as she tried to shut the door, and she wasn't beaten up too badly. He just growled and told her to shut her mouth and said something like, "I'm not gonna rape you, but shut your mouth." He beat her, but not completely unconscious. And then, when he walked out of her room, he went downstairs and walked out the front door. So he left the dead girl's room unlocked. My roommate locked herself in her room and called the police, who were there immediately. What's pretty creepy about the whole thing is that when they inspected the dead girl's room, they kept asking for clarification. So nobody has lived in this room for how long? Nobody has been renting this room, right? Did the parents take everything after the girl passed away? The guy had a really sweet setup, actually, and had brought his own small mattress to put over the bed frame. Obviously, the mattress was too small for the bed frame. He left most of his stuff because he probably didn't expect a confrontation that night. I don't think he knew she would be there that night because she never was. It probably sucked for him when I moved in because before me, the bastard had the whole house to himself 2 days a week. The police did ask me quite a lot of questions and were very interested in hearing my statement about hearing footsteps at night. My 3 roommates and my friend are now convinced that maybe the girl didn't die the way they said she did, and maybe he murdered her. But I think the autopsy would have been able to distinguish a murder from a seizure. In their defense, the whole thing is really creepy. We're not really sure how long the guy had been living here, but it's very likely that it has been for at least a few months. The theory is that the guy has been climbing in through the window, so it's possible that he was even there at times when all of us were there. The police are really interested in talking to the landlord because they want to know how the man found out about the vacant room. The landlord is a pretty decent guy, so I don't know if there's anything going on there. I don't even feel an "I told you so" attitude from the whole thing. I think that I'm just glad that the girl is okay because she seemed pretty shaken up. I just wish people were more willing to listen to me when I told them that I thought somebody was coming into our home. I even said it might be a squatter, which everyone laughed at. This happened very recently, so it might be a while before an update. As of now, the man has not been found, but the police remain optimistic about finding him. Whatever that means. This has been a pretty terrible month for me, and I don't know if I want to be at this house anymore. I don't have much left on the lease, and I recently lost my job, so it might be best for me to leave the place now. I doubt the guy will come back because all of his stuff has been taken out. But I still find it creepy in this house. I definitely don't spend weekends here anymore.